and thank you much to the organizers of the Swine Day committee for the invitation. This is a great program and a really wonderful showcase of the talent at Iowa State as well as at the Iowa Pork Industry Center. And it's an honor to be here on the agenda with all of you. And also thanks to everyone for attending. Your support for Iowa Swine Day and your support for the swine industry in Iowa doesn't go unnoticed, and it's greatly appreciated. It's my pleasure to spend a little time today talking about the work of the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force at Iowa Pork and collectively how the Iowa swine industry has been preparing for a foreign animal disease outbreak for the last 22 months. So many of us are feeling some level of like, what month is it? Or when did that happen? Or how long ago were we talking about that thing? So really a blurring of time and space, right, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to ask you to think back to a time far, far away, way back in your foggy memories, to find August 3rd of 2018. This is when the public news reached the U.S. swine, 2018, sorry, when the news reached the U.S. swine industry that the first case of ASF had been diagnosed in China. So now the arguments that ASF was circulating in China prior to August of 2018 are loud and plentiful, right? But in general, ASF and the threat to U.S. pork production effectively entered our lexicon loud and proud on August 3rd of 2018. And I want you to think back to that time kind of as the anchor date for the rest of this presentation today. So I'll use that as the starting point to share with you the makeup, the mission, and the priorities established by the Iowa Pork Foreign Animal Disease Task Force, as well as the specific activities accomplished in the state, things like research, policy changes, and educational resources that have been developed. And then lastly, I'll summarize the implications from foreign animal disease preparedness that can be learned from the blurred months of March, April, May. And I've made them all one word to really represent how the market disruptions from COVID-19 felt to the swine industry in Iowa. Many of us so I wanted to take a moment to really represent to you graphically how the plethora of activities related to foreign animal disease preparedness in Iowa. And I chose to use this bit of a windy road as the graphic, if you will, because FAD preparedness is not a straight line, it's not a straight trajectory, like ever is it a straight trajectory. And it really reminds me of this meme that success is not a straight line and neither is foreign animal disease preparedness. So come along with me on this not so straight, somewhat windy walk of how Iowa's swine industry has prepared for a foreign animal disease outbreak. A long time ago, back in 2015, the Swine Health Committee at Iowa Pork recognized the importance of adding foreign animal disease preparedness to their program of work. So that led to the 2016 creation of the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force, and the group provided input to the board of directors. They worked on some small projects over the years, and then we jumped forward to August 3rd of 2018. And as the industry was learning more about the threat of ASF, IPPA began working on reorganizing and kind of repackaging and reinvigorating the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force. And that started with an in-person meeting happening shortly after Iowa Pork Congress in March of 2019. And the focus of that meeting was to do group interactions, reestablish the mission of the group, and then prioritize key areas of preparedness and response. In order to help with the prioritization process, the task force felt it was important to clearly define the mission of the group, which is to engage pork industry stakeholders to prioritize activities and resources so that foreign animal disease preparedness is improved for Iowa's pork producers. And the makeup of the group, it has about 25 members, 15 producers, active pork producers in Iowa, and then 2 packer representatives, 2 allied industry representatives. There are 3 people on Iowa State staff, and then there are 3 folks from Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, and U.S. Department of Agriculture. And then as the group has worked through things, they have occasionally needed subject matter experts, so they may call in guests to help with items on the task force agenda, like county emergency management, National Pork Board, researchers doing specific work, and then subject matter experts in various other fields that they may need. Now, before I get too far into talking about the activities of the task force, it's really important to us to give a nod to the key partnerships that have really played a role in the success of the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force. We have been very grateful and appreciative of the help and support out of IDOLS with Secretary Mike Nag, and then Iowa State veterinarian Dr. Jeff Heisen and his team, including emergency management and planning with Dr. Andrew Henningsen. And then also the Iowa Pork Industry Center, Dr. Jason Ross and Dr. Chris Rodemaker and their team of swine extension staff have been absolutely integral to the success of the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force. I can tell you with a lot of certainty that we at IPPA could probably do 1/16 of the educational offerings on our own. So many, many thanks to the support and the help from Iowa Pork Industry Center. And then also, who I'm sharing the agenda with today, Dr. Roger Main and his really capable team at the Iowa State Veterinary Diagnostic Lab have also been a very, very important and key partnership that has been a part of the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force. So the task force met again then in June of 2019. At their first meeting in March, they set 5 high priority areas or tactics, and the time between the first meeting in March and the second meeting in June was spent on refining those tactics and activities underneath them. And at the meeting in June, the task force was updated on the progress towards those tactics, and then they added a couple of tactics and high priority areas. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the details of those high priority areas that they assigned. And I've chosen to represent these as gears with teeth on them. And you'll see the individual activities underneath the gears, or the things that we did to address those high priority areas throughout the rest of the presentation today. But I want you to keep this kind of gear mechanism with the teeth interacting top of mind. So the first high priority area is improving carcass disposal information and resources. There is arguably a ton of information on carcass disposal that's available. Some of it's outdated, most of it is scattered around, and little of it is easy to access in a kind of a one-stop shop sort of way. So to help with this, the task force prioritized a carcass management white paper, a really good summary of all the current information available on mortality management. They also funded some carcass management research and the building of relationships between pork producers and the Iowa DNR, Department of Natural Resources, because almost all carcass disposal decisions begin and end with the Iowa DNR. Let's do a few more details about the carcass research that they funded. The first project was a joint effort between Iowa, Minnesota, and South Dakota, and it was done at South Dakota State University, looking at whole carcass decomposition as well as disease elimination in above ground burial, which is also sometimes called shallow burial. If you're not familiar with this process, it's really a hybrid between burial and composting. So you dig a shallow trench, and then you layer the carbon material and the whole carcasses in the trench, and then you cover the dirt, you cover all of that with the dirt that was excavated from the trench. And I would be happy to share the summary and results of this trial with anyone if they're interested. The second carcass research project aims to look at what happens if carcasses are left in the barn after euthanasia or depopulation. Now, I will tell you that this seems to be the area that people have the strongest reaction to. We have certainly heard a lot of, well, that is a stupid idea, or that doesn't make any sense, quite a lot when this topic comes up. But the truth is, we really don't know what will happen if we are forced to leave carcasses in the building. And one of the goals in a foreign animal disease outbreak is to limit the spread of disease. And that is a risk that can be lowered by not moving infected carcasses around, if at all possible. So in an effort to really understand what would happen and answer some of those questions, a small-scale 2-room finisher on a trailer was built to simulate real barn conditions, and Dr. Brett Ramirez and his team will be able to study the rate and effects of carcass decomposition in the barn. They'll be able to look at virus degradation and also gain insights on what happens to the equipment in the barn, because who knows what will happen to the feeders and the water lines and all of those things if carcasses are left in there. We were actually really hoping for you to be able to see the trailer unit, the mobile unit in living flesh, pun intended, at Iowa Swine Day, but alas, here we are in a virtual option. So this picture is the best that you will get. The next high priority tactic is increasing the number of sites in Iowa with biosecurity maps and enhanced biosecurity plans. So this is largely a function of increasing the number of farms or producers in Iowa participating with secure pork supply. So that's the maps and plans associated with that. And this particular tactic would not at all have been possible without the really talented team at Iowa Pork Industry Center. So a huge shout out to Dr. Ross for giving up a little bit of time of his staff to allow this to happen. And huge kudos to Amanda Chipman and to Dr. Chris Rodemaker for really executing on this one. The next high priority tactic is in the area of animal movement. So the formation of several working groups that provide industry perspective and guidance to Iowa Department of Ag as well as USDA on things like controlled movements, stop movement orders, permitting, surveillance testing. This tactic also included some regional meetings with pork producers from Minnesota. And then moving on to the tactic around truck sanitation and the creation of sanitary standards for market halls. This project would not have been possible without the help of the VDL, Dr. Roger Main and his team. And I will give you just a few highlights of the activities under this tactic later, but the importance of the work will be further emphasized in the presentation that you see from Dr. Main here next. And the next priority area is a subgroup that was formed to discuss the challenges and opportunities with disease traceability among animals that are moving through different channels, so moving through coal markets and buying stations as an example. And then the last one for this slide is a high priority tactic centered around providing guidance and industry perspective on exhibition swine in Iowa. Now, the next two gears that I have for you are set apart just a little bit. Not because they are more or less important than any of the ones on the previous slide, but because they represent some kind of more overarching, broader priorities that interact with all of the previous ones we just discussed. The first one is in the policy arena. So I want you to think of this one as position statements and policy rule changes at the state and federal level. And most importantly, supporting the ongoing work of National Pork Producers Council, or NPPC. So a really good example is lending some support and help to NPPC on their discussions with USDA regarding the use of oral fluids and accepting various sample types in foreign animal disease outbreaks. Other policy activities include drafting resolutions for U.S. Animal Health Association, providing comments to USDA on some response documents that they created for producers and states, and then working with the Iowa Pork Public Policy Director, Drew Mogler, on changes in the state legislature. The other broader, more overarching tactic here is in the area of resources and communication. So this is really honing in on the creation of very producer-centric materials, trainings, webinars, that type of thing. This also includes drafting communication plans for various audiences in collaborations with the communication staff at IDALS, for example, and then also internal to IPPA and for producers. Lastly, in this area is sharing a lot of information with our stakeholders in pork production. So other people that wouldn't necessarily be directly affected by a foreign animal disease, but certainly be tangentially affected. So our partners in grain farming, feed mills, that type of thing. Now, I want you to keep in mind that I've given you this is really the 30,000-foot view, right, of the tactics. And I want you to keep these gears with their teeth, their interacting teeth in mind as we continue on our kind of convoluted path of foreign animal disease activities. And over the next several slides, I'm going to give you a lot more details about the activities that kind of make up the teeth or the spokes of those gears. So let's take a deeper dive into those details I was just talking about. The work in the areas of secure pork supply and foreign animal disease prep workshops, as well as the truck sanitation tactic, progressed greatly in July and August of last year. The staff at the Iowa Pork Industry Center hosted 10 workshops over several months across 12 counties in Iowa with nearly 300 attendees. And they created an enormous amount of materials such as videos, checklists, worksheets, FAQ documents to help producers create their secure pork supply maps and plans and write those, really focus on those enhanced biosecurity plans. And they built out a very nice user-friendly section of the Pork Industry Center website and provided individual coaching and assistance to producers with their enhanced biosecurity plans and maps. In the area of truck sanitation, Dr. Main and his team conducted a truck wash capacity survey for Iowa. This was focused on market haul loads and included private and public truck washes. They also stood up a group of subject matter experts from the livestock hauling world that shared their perspective, their feedback on various levels of truck cleanliness. And the group has continued to work virtually. The stuff that they have done will make a little bit more sense, and Dr. Main can sort of expand on that as he presents the Swine Health Improvement Plan pilot project in the next presentation. Also in July was the meeting of the Exhibition Swine Working Group. They focused largely on health inspections and certification or health certificates for exhibition swine in Iowa, like the Iowa State Fair. And then lastly, the permitting group, that working group also met in July to discuss animal movements and surveillance testing. More specifically, the group targeted their discussion on addressing 4 questions from the producer's individual perspective. So this is relative to ASF response plan. And those 4 questions were, if pigs were to be permitted into a site next door to yours, what information would you like to know? What would give you confidence in the movement? So this is specific for animals moving like out of the control area into a site next to a producer's. The second question was, in the current plan, what are you capable of doing tomorrow? What's another way of thinking about it is what's easy? Or what is the most difficult components to start doing tomorrow? Then what are the challenges concerning you with movement across state lines? And then the last one is, what still puzzles you about permitting? The areas of permitted movements and surveillance testing are arguably the least understood and the least developed in the current state and federal ASF response plans. And the working group's answers to these 4 questions shared the perspective of pork producers with state and federal animal health officials. Ooh, sorry about that. So, did these questions solve all the alls around permitting and surveillance? They absolutely did not. No, not at all. But the value was definitely in the discussion and the perspective sharing that took place between the producers and the state animal health officials. And it provided a really good place to start for drafting the Iowa State response plan that was exercised in September. And it also helped identify areas that need further development by state and federal animal health officials. Then, then we move on to September, which brought another face-to-face meeting of the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force, where they discussed the activities of those various working groups that met through the summer, those various working groups that had kind of been chipping away at the high priority tactics I just discussed. And the September meeting also set some key next steps for the remainder of the year, such as funding a PEDB prevalence study as a research tool to help inform on the truck sanitation tactic. It also served as the meeting that did the primary preparations for the ASF Functional Exercise that took place in September. If you did not have an opportunity to participate or know much about the ASF Functional Exercise that took place in September, you missed a really key activity for the swine industry regarding foreign animal disease preparedness. The exercise was hosted by USDA, created and run by a third-party consulting company, and had a primary objective of extensively exercising or kind of working out, if you will, the response of state animal health officials and their plans to a pretend ASF outbreak. And the secondary objective that we had here was an opportunity for the swine industry itself to, including producers, packers, and the diagnostic labs, to see firsthand what will happen during a foreign animal disease outbreak. So the exercise itself included the participation of the 14 major pork-producing states. Iowa, of course, was one of those. In Iowa, we had 3 producer players who volunteered their time as well as their farms for the exercise, and then 2 packer players. And then throughout the state of Iowa, we had around 200 observers during the week. So it was a 4-day exercise. The first day was on the farm with a simulated foreign animal disease outbreak and investigation, and then included a small piece with the diagnostic lab. The second day was kind of in the office, and it was more for the state animal health officials to work through their movement standstill plans with various scenarios and communications. Wednesday, we went back on the farm to review herd plans and discuss depopulation and disposal methods, as well as how indemnity would function. And then the last day was back in the office looking at permitted movements after the control area had been set up. The ASF exercise in September was very, very, very impactful for really elevating everyone's understanding of how a foreign animal disease response would go in Iowa. And much of October was spent in hot washes. These are sometimes called debriefs. They are sometimes called lessons learned meetings, whatever resonates with you. And those are focused on revealing the gaps from the exercise. So USDA and IDALS did a hot wash together. That feedback was then incorporated into a hot wash with Iowa, and Iowa Pork was also fortunate to participate in a regional hot wash with Minnesota Pork. And all of the learnings or the gaps were compiled and into a state report that was sent to IDALS with action items for improvement. And I'll share the key takeaways from that report in a minute. But first, a couple of other activities that happened in October. Minnesota Pork also formed a task force that's very similar to the one in Iowa and invited IPPA to participate in regular meetings of the regionalization working group. So the Emergency Disease Management Committee for Swine, or the EDMCS in Minnesota, is the name of the group, and also consists of producers, packers, state and federal animal health officials, as well as university staff. And they have chosen to create kind of smaller working groups based on the various areas in the USDA Red Book, or the guidebook for ASF response planning. And because of a lot of the overlap between Iowa and Minnesota pork production, it made sense for the 2 groups to interact and collaborate in the area of regionalization. The annual meeting of the U.S. Animal Health Association, or USAHA, was held in Providence, Rhode Island at the end of October. And the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force and Swine Health Committee at IPPA helped to draft resolutions that were shared at 4 USAHA committees, and they were ultimately adopted by the board of directors and sent to USDA. And I want you to think of this as like another avenue of policymaking that supports the efforts of NPPC on the topics of stop movement orders, active surveillance at animal health laboratories, vaccine bank funding, and diagnostic sample types. So let's jump back a little bit to those learnings from the exercise. And the gaps or the learnings can really be identified or grouped into 4 major buckets. The first one is the general understanding of the swine industry. So to pork producers and swine veterinarians, to those of you largely on this webinar, those of you that are living #TeamPork every day, there's a common jargon that's used, and we have routine biosecurity and swine health practices that take place on the farm that we take for granted, right? And the exercise revealed that these terms or practices are not well understood by people who don't work with pigs every day. And those are these folks in the state and federal animal health system are going to be the ones that respond to a foreign animal disease. So there's a need to build that understanding and improve it. And things like regional farm tours for state and federal staff, meetings with the DNR to help them understand kind of how we manage carcasses now and what ongoing research is happening specific to pigs. The second area for improvement is the bucket of state-to-state consistency. So the 14 major pork-producing states were invited to participate in the exercise because we all know how many pigs and people producers cross state lines regularly. So the exercise provided a look into how states would interact with each other during a foreign animal disease outbreak. There were times in the exercise where the lack of state consistency across state lines was frustrating or confusing for the producer players in the exercise, but that's exactly why we do exercises. There have been several meetings of state animal health officials since the exercise to help with the consistency across state lines, and they continue to work on a lot of things like common language in contact tracing, like a suspect premises, flow, system, whatever that stuff may be. And then speaking of things from the lab and kind of lab testing numbers and results, the third bucket identified was in the area of sample collection and testing. So the question of lab surge capacity and availability of reagents has been top of mind for a while, and we still kind of continue to process through that one, although there's been a lot of progress made on that particular area. There also still remains a lot of solid guidance on the use of oral fluids, although also something that has really, really progressed. The discussion has improved a lot as of late. And how many animals need to be tested, all of those things that are going to really need to be fleshed out for in-response plans and explained to producers. Then the last bucket of need identified in the functional exercise is the area of producer documentation and resources. This is really kind of getting back to the that major priority of producer-centric resources. So Iowa's 3 producer players in the exercise very quickly learned how many forms you have to fill out and how much documentation it requires in a foreign animal disease outbreak. And so we really need to work on the resources available to producers. Now, I can't say to you enough how valuable the functional exercise was to really elevating everyone's preparedness in Iowa. And the pork producers here and IPPA are very, very thankful for the efforts and participation of USDA and IDOLs to make it happen here. For some people, I will tell you, at the end of that exercising week, maybe at the end of the hot washes, it felt a little bit overwhelming. Felt like the gaps were just too big, too much to accomplish. But I really believe that Ronald Reagan said it well by saying that when the plans fail, the planners plan more. And that's exactly what has happened here with IDALS, USDA, and the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force. They've been doing that. They have planned more and they've planned harder based on the plans that failed in the exercise. So if we go back on our windy road here, there was another meeting of the task force in November of 19 that they really focused on the gaps that were identified in the exercise. And if you'll recall the gears that represented the high priority items, the task force did a fantastic job of taking a look at how to fit the exercise next steps into the teeth of those gears that they'd already identified. And then in December of last year, IPIC added some additional workshops for producers on secure pork supply and foreign animal disease preparedness. And I will say that those additional workshops definitely had the advantage of the insight from the functional exercise, making them a really, really realistic experience. Also in December was the first meeting of a subgroup between the Minnesota task force and the Iowa task forces. And they met in Austin. This was a mix of producers, packers, and the state veterinarians from each state to have a robust discussion about some of those state-to-state consistency challenges. And then much of December and early January was spent on Iowa Pork Congress. There were several educational seminar offerings for producers and allied industry on the topic of FAD preparedness. So a panel discussion with the producer players from the exercise, as well as a second panel discussion focused on foreign experiences with ASF in China, Vietnam, and Russia. And then IPIC also offered another foreign animal disease workshop there. And after Iowa Pork Congress, the FAD task force met again to be updated on progress towards their high priority tactics. They had a very candid discussion on the state-to-state consistency challenges. And most importantly from this meeting, they provided feedback to IDALS on some state policy. So their discussion focused on the authority of IDALS in two areas that were specific to foreign animal disease outbreaks. So what we discovered in the functional exercise, based on two scenarios that were kind of lobbed at IDALS, is that they actually lacked the legal authority to destroy or conduct disease surveillance testing on feral or loose swine. And they also lacked the legal authority to take control of abandoned animals, either on the road or in barns during a disease outbreak. So the FAD task force helped with the language for a department bill that was actually proposed and debated in February, but due to COVID-19 was not actually passed until June. And then on the screen, you'll see the addition of the trespass language that's in italics. That was actually added to the department bill as a result of some of the things that happened during COVID-19 and our market disruptions. So then in February of this year, which to some of you now is feeling like a freaking century ago, right? The second meeting of the Minnesota and Iowa task forces took place. This time they met in Algona, and this group made significant progress sharing perspective with the Minnesota and Iowa state veterinarians, largely on things like permitted movement. And then keeping with the Minnesota theme, the FAD task force and the Swine Health Committee at IPPA supported a grind and compost demo in Minnesota. So this was much like the hot weather demo that took place in North Carolina, using a horizontal tree grinder and mixing with carbon material found in Minnesota like wood chips and corn stalks. The carcasses were ground and then placed in long windrows for composting. And the idea with the cold weather demo is to actually verify that you could start up these types of grinding compost piles in cold weather and that they would still be effective. And again, I'm happy to share photos and videos and the results of those field trials with anyone that's interested. And then like almost everyone else, we were cruising along, right? We were executing on our tactics, and we were getting a bunch of work done and making progress on gaps. And then this little beauty happened. So COVID-19, the big black swan, arrived, and I know that I don't need to spend a lot of time talking to this group about the market disruptions and the challenges. Many of them are still ongoing with COVID-19. But what I can share with you is what IPPA and IDOLS, as well as Iowa Pork Industry Center, did during the blurred months now of March, April, May, June, because that's how they feel, and what some of those implications are for foreign animal disease preparedness. The first is the formation of the Iowa Resource Coordination Center, or the RCC, which is a private-public partnership between IDOLS, Iowa State, USDA, and the livestock associations in Iowa. It is still functional today, so it connects producers with industry experts, state and federal agencies, and technical specialists to explore every option to harvest livestock in the face of COVID-19 market disruptions. And then as a last resort, the RCC provides technical resources from Iowa State Animal Science, Ag Engineering, and the Veterinary School to help producers humanely euthanize and dispose of livestock. And the important piece here is the backbone of the RCC is a formalized incident management structure. This would be something that's used in foreign animal disease outbreaks or in like wildland fire operations. And the incident command structure facilitates a reporting chain of command and communication between groups that probably wouldn't normally interact with each other, and ensures that all of those groups are really singing from the same hymnal, if you will, with the same information. The second, in addition to the next area from COVID-19 market disruption, in addition to the customer service part of the RCC, the leadership team between IDOLS and IPPA was able to coordinate efforts to receive research funding directly from USDA for euthanasia or depopulation pilot projects. I cannot emphasize to you enough the amount of outstanding work that was accomplished by Bill Winkleman, Dr. Chris Rodemaker, and Dr. Locke Carricker in record time. So Iowa was the first state to request funding from USDA as well as the first to receive it. And they have some funds to do 2 euthanasia pilot projects. The first one is using CO2 in temporary corrals that can be built indoors on solid flooring or outdoors on a concrete slab like you can see here in the photos. And then those temporary corrals are tarped and the CO2 is introduced for euthanasia. Each corral is designed to hold a semi-load of market hogs. The second project is a portable V restrainer using a pneumatic captive bolt gun. Both pilot projects have euthanized a small number of pigs, right, and at this point are waiting for some equipment modifications to continue with their field trials. And detailed plans and SOPs, including the equipment list and people requirements, will be produced and available in the toolkit of DPOP planning for a foreign animal disease outbreak. Another area that we were able to glean some experience from in the COVID-19 market disruptions is in the area of disposal. So Iowa has been considerably lucky that rendering was able to absorb a large portion of the carcasses that were generated from the modest euthanasia of market hogs that took place. So we didn't exactly get to exercise on-farm disposal as it would likely be in a foreign animal disease outbreak, but we still accumulated a lot of valuable resources in the process. And a team at IPPA worked really hard to create a document that helps individuals walk through all of the considerations that they may have if they wanted to set up a centralized disposal site as a fee-for-service type of thing. This includes everything from considering the site selection to the legal liability to the staffing requirements to the cost. There were also several valuable contact lists that were created in the process as well. So with the help of IDOLs, DNR, and contractors, lists like the landfills that were willing to accept animal carcasses, and lists of carbon materials for sale, and lists of equipment companies for renting grinders and compost turners and all of the bits that you would need for disposal. All of those lists are now living lists that we have and will have considerable use in a foreign animal disease outbreak. And then lastly, with the help of ISU Extension and the ISU Ag Engineering Department, particularly Dave Stender and Chris Cole, there were two disposal field trials that were conducted in Northwest Iowa. The first was looking at composting of whole carcasses and feedlot manure, and the second was a type of air curtain incinerator. And again, all of the learnings from those field trials will be aggregated and available to producers doing disposal planning for a foreign animal disease outbreak. All right, I'm going to shift gears here a bit on you as I wrap up. I think a lot of us can agree that this is kind of what July of 2020 feels like, right? We're starting to find the stairs out of the deep end of market disruption due to COVID-19 in the swine industry. Granted, not everything is rosy at this point. We still have some economic conditions that, if you look down the road, are not all that bright. And some days we feel like we take several steps backwards into the water. But I would say, in general, we're starting to climb the staircase here. So what do we do next with foreign animal disease preparedness, especially with what we've learned from COVID-19 market disruption? I am going to try to introduce a little bit of levity to the presentation here. And I think that the answer to those questions that I just asked lies in what I like to call the 5 cliches of COVID. I hope that this elicits some groans on the other side of my computer monitor, but I also hope that it's a really nice way of summarizing what we've learned from COVID-19 thus far. The first of the 5 cliches of COVID is really the overarching lesson. I want you to think of this one as the umbrella under which the rest of these cliches stand. And it is, no one can whistle a symphony. It takes an entire orchestra to play it. So the biggest lesson to learned so far from COVID comes from the formation of the Resource Coordination Center. Like I mentioned before, bringing together several groups and agencies that wouldn't normally be in regular communication with each other had a ton of value. So there were 60 calls into the RCC. Some people are going to say that's a lot. Some people are going to say that's not very many. But I think regardless, IPPA, USDA, IDOLs, ISU, DNR, NRCS, meeting and sharing in this regular cadence. Or another way to look at it, if we're going to stick with cliches, is everyone playing from the same symphony music. And also exercising that incident management team and chain of command structure greatly increased the service provided to producers, and is something that the Iowa swine industry will want to use again in a foreign animal disease outbreak. The second cliche of COVID that I'll share with you is, you don't know what you don't know. So arguably, everyone received an executive short course in how the pork supply chain functions, and it provided a sneak peek at what disruption from a foreign animal disease outbreak will bring, and revealed a lot of areas for us to build resiliency going forward. It really underscored the need to better understand testing availability and surge capacity at our veterinary diagnostic labs. And for many producers and packers, they became acutely aware of what traceability and contact tracing looks like. And it wasn't even with their pigs, right? This was about human contact tracing. It also allowed us to better see what types of political and social science challenges we may encounter during a foreign animal disease outbreak. One of the best ways to fix a knowledge gap and to help you with the you don't know what you don't know is to engage in collaborative learning, which is something that you'll see as a theme in the remaining cliches. The third cliche of COVID, as I see it, is you don't know your head is in a vice until your head is in a vice. And I owe this one to Dr. Kaizen. And by this one, I mean that depopulation or euthanasia and disposal on a large scale looked really easy on paper and in an exercise. And when it actually came to finding all the equipment, finding the people, managing worker mental health, and scaling up approved methods, it became a lot more difficult. So collectively, we also became aware, again, very acutely, of the lack of equipment for depopulation and the need to build that capacity and store it strategically in pig-producing states. We also discovered that finding carbon material was way harder than we thought. And I think the large number of learning by doing and the field trials that have happened as a result will greatly increase our knowledge and execution on these two processes. The fourth cliche of COVID is necessity is the mother of invention. Like I mentioned earlier, we got a sneak peek at the supply chain disruption that could occur in the initial days of a foreign animal disease outbreak if we can't move pigs around like we normally would. So the Applied Swine Nutrition Group at ISU did a phenomenal job creating resources and standing up a timely research trial for producers and nutritionists on slowing the growth of market hogs, which is something completely counter to what we normally do in pork production. We have a ton of experiences and stories here from producers that found alternative markets that they have not considered for many years. And I think the Resource Coordination Center and the Iowa Disposal Assistance Programs are examples of very quickly creating programs from the ground up, all very positive things that were done extremely well and quickly out of necessity. Again, those are great examples of experiences we'll want to repeat in a foreign animal disease outbreak. And then the fifth and final cliche of COVID that I have for you is embrace the suck. So taken from the military term, when you consciously accept or appreciate something that is extremely hard or unpleasant and unavoidable for forward progress. This is indeed really hard stuff. Euthanasia, poor economic outlook for producers, a removal of the ability to plan ahead, managing crisis burnout, managing risk tolerance, managing the mental well-being of those around you. This is all really, period, hard, period stuff. And a foreign animal disease outbreak will be no different for the swine industry. So I think if we can all start to embrace the suck now, where we consciously accept some of this now, it'll actually make some of the unavoidable in a foreign animal disease outbreak less unavoidable. And it'll be really important to move forward and use those lessons. So now what? What does moving forward actually look like? It's very easy for me to Monday morning quarterback the COVID experience. And yes, if you're paying attention this far in, that was a football reference for those of you that are desperately missing sports, or if you're like me, you're strongly, strongly desiring Cyclone football in the fall. But all kidding aside, it is really easy for me to stand here and pontificate to you, but really, what is next? So for the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force at IPPA and the future of FAD preparedness activities, it means taking the time now to assess where we're at. So getting a broad perspective from a variety of Iowa pork industry stakeholders on what are the key experiences and learnings from COVID that translate. What gaps still remain? What are the things that about foreign animal disease response that are still puzzling us 22 months later? And that's what IPPA is doing right now. Then we will aggregate all of that information and have the task force see where the feedback fits into those original priorities. Maybe they don't fit at all. Maybe they'll eliminate some. Maybe they'll make some new ones. But with that info, they'll be able to kind of realign it and reorganize their priorities. And then lastly, we'll look forward to working with all of our key partners at ISU, IDALS, and USDA to closing those identified gaps and really elevating the overall preparedness of the Iowa swine industry. I am going to close out with these two pictures. So this quote from Henry Ford is something that I shared quite frequently, almost as a motto per se for the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force, that coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, and working together is success. Now, I know that many of the households here during quarantine, you chose to watch Tiger King. No judgment for me, I swear. The Eggers household, on the other hand, chose to go all in on The Last Dance, which is the 10-part series on Michael Jordan and the 1997 Chicago Bulls championship season. So after COVID-19, I think, this is my opinion, that this is the new meme or the quote to use with the Foreign Animal Disease Task Force. Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships. So we undoubtedly have a tremendous amount of talent in the swine industry, a tremendous amount. And it will be the teamwork and the strategic use of the collective intelligence that will help us win championships, if you can actually call a foreign animal disease outbreak a championship. So with that, I will take any questions.